Sleeping with the Enemy by Nancy Price. Chapter 6. For a moment, Sarah's eyes widened. Then she shut them, took a deep breath, and waited. As the first swell struck John Fleischman's boat, a black, cold Atlantic swallowed her with nothing more than one momentary scar in a wave's trough. Sarah dived deep, stiff-legged. She had waded into the YWCA pool step by step, her eyes shut. Now she sank, with open eyes, into Manhasset Bay. Bitter cold salt water closed over her head, and suddenly she dropped into the past, drowned in it, 12 years old and swimming with her brother Joe. Their parents were home in bed. Moonlight glittered on Joe's wet face. He screamed that he couldn't go on, couldn't get his breath. She saw his twisted face. Her body acted for itself. It shed sneakers and jacket and kicked her down, shocked with cold. Now her head rang with Joe's yell. Her brother's wild face in the moonlight was printed inside her head with the sound of his scream as he went down, as she went down. Sarah struggled to find him, diving deep. Then the memory of Joe's loved hands fastened on her. Give up. She was running out of air. Her lungs were screaming too. Give up. It would be simple to go down. She sank, locked to Joe, deeper and deeper. And then her body began to fight. It kicked, bit at her brother's strangling hands, beat Joe's face with its fists. Her back arched. She was going up. Sarah beat and kicked and bit her way free of Joe, her lungs howling for air. She came up from the memory of her brother. Her body saved her again without thought. The feel of Joe's cold flesh, the sound of his scream, sank in black water. Now wind blew in Sarah's face, and she wasn't 12 anymore. Manhasset Bay spread wide around her, an immense clouded night sky and a heaving floor of water. She rode like a fish, her long hair spread on it. She gulped air into her lungs and sobbed. Waves slapped at her. The tide was going out, and the current pulled her with it, but wind blew waves back into the bay. Bitter cold water lifted her, dropped her in a hollow, lifted her again. Martin yelled, "Sarah!" far away by a bobbing light. "Sarah!" Sarah dived away from Martin's scream. Her aim was good. She came up by a slippery swimming buoy and grabbed it, panting, grinning through salt water. She got her breath and turned on her back to float under a wide, clearing sky and look for the small flicker of a flashlight as a boat moved closer. "Sarah!" Martin yelled. Sarah watched one small sailboat under a sky full of gauzy clouds, a high-riding moon, and fields of stars and space. "Sarah!" Sarah opened her mouth once as if to answer, but what could she have said except goodbye? Martin jumped overboard. Just before Sarah dived again, she saw John hauling him over the boat's side. The boat drew nearer and nearer. "Sarah!" She heard Martin, but she had her breath back. She could dive away from the sound and sink from sight, her long hair eddying for a second in yellow moonlight. When she came up, she was almost warm in water that cradled her. She swam to another buoy, salt water in her mouth. Now Sarah was in the lee of Sand Hook. Another buoy rose before her, and she clung to it, panting, listening, floating in gentler waves. The boat was much farther away now. Martin and John sailed toward the bay mouth. Someone fallen overboard would be pulled there, drowning in outgoing tide. But she floated in the full moon's light. Sarah! Martin's far-off shout died in sounds of water. She had time to rest and stretch herself in all that space of sea and sky. After a while, Sarah swam slowly to a buoy nearest the beach house, then aimed for the gap in the shore, a black spot that was 2 lights smashed. Her feet touched bottom in the dark. She pushed forward. Sarah! Echoed in her head. Wet jeans and shirt dragged her thin body down, heavy in surf. You bastard, she wanted to yell over her shoulder at a moonlit bay. Lighted houses stood too far to hear her over pounding water, but she kept her mouth shut. Wet clothes stuck to her. She waded through the suck and shove of waves. 2 beach houses were black shapes above her, empty and still. Sarah tore off her wet shirt, stripped off her jeans. Beat me up when I tell the truth, she whispered fiercely, a shining wet blonde in black silk and lace, stamping through foam. Water hissed at her feet. She yanked down the lace teddy. I'm through. I'm free. Follow me. Go on. Drown. The teddy rolled into a wet pair of nooses and tripped her. She sat down hard on her bare bottom and wanted to shout. Make me beg you for money for your own meals, you bastard. Her clothes slid out to sea with the water rush, but she grabbed them and splashed to her feet, gleaming naked in moonlight. Beg and cheat and steal because of you. 2 houses watched a small, thin, naked figure slosh back and forth, jerking, punching at air with wet clothes in both hands. Never talk anymore, never read books together or listen to music or go to a play. Just watch me, hate me when I have a little 2-bit job. Skinny and slick with water, a small figure smashed at waves with its feet, breasts bouncing. Sneak money out of your billfold. I've got a soul. Lie about taking your suit to the cleaners. The little naked figure jumped up and down. Lie, cheat, steal, or I get beaten up. It dropped wet clothes and snatched handfuls of sand to throw them at the sea. I don't know you. I never did. You corrupter. Sarah sank to her knees in foaming water. Beat me up, she yelled inside her head, her face contorted. Stamp on my toe and break it. Break my wrist. She put her head on her skinny knees and cried. Her long wet hair streamed out with the waves, streamed back. Then she crawled to her feet, looking at her thin arms and legs covered with goose pimples and bruises. A few tendrils of her hair began to dry a little, raveling along her bare shoulder. There was a piece of driftwood by the wall. I loved you, she whispered, wet clothes in one hand, driftwood in the other. A small light, almost too far away to see, bobbed near the bay mouth. She scraped out her footprints fast with the knotted stick as she hurried across sand. The memory of their happy shouts rang around her, thin as moonlight, and she remembered lying in waves there, laughing and bare and wet under Martin's wet bareness. She was dry enough now. She walked on top of the wall as far as she could, sobbing softly, then wound her shirt around one foot and her jeans around the other to work her way through beach grass. No footsteps showed, only smudges in sand. Stairs that stretched above Sarah were beach stairs that somebody else had run up and down 1,000 times in sea wind and sunlight, or made love on in the dark. When she climbed them in a hurry, stiff-legged, she remembered those sharp stair edges biting into her, and a slow-motion fall. Sarah opened the kitchen door. Her eyes were used to darkness. She saw Martin's empty plate and the piece of steak she had hardly touched, and smelled the bunch of red roses on the table. She poked at their bed once to hear a 3-note honeymoon squeak, dry as an old snakeskin. Far back in the corner under the couch was a plastic bag full of all she would need. She wrapped her wet clothes in plastic. She had to take them with her. Hurrying, she dressed in new clothes from the bag, Panties, bra, a long-sleeved shirt, slacks, sandals. Secret money had been sewed into her raincoat's lining. Months of cheating and sneaking. She couldn't take the coat. He'd miss it. She'd ripped the money out that afternoon and put it in an old wallet in the plastic bag. The bag had cheese in it, too. Sarah had hidden it under carrots in the refrigerator drawer. There was bread in the bag, and powdered milk, and coffee and peanut butter she'd brought from Montrose. There was an old knife, too, and a spoon and cup. Standing in darkness and the sound of waves, Sarah braided her long hair with shaking hands. A car motor could cut off in the pines. There might be a knock at the door. Her left hand flashed in the dark bathroom mirror. She stopped to pull her rings off, tie them in plastic, and drop them in the bag. When she pinned braids tight to her head, no rings scraped against her fingers. Moonlight streamed through bedroom windows now. She found makeup in the plastic bag and could see well enough to put on black eyebrows, thick and heavy, and a bright red mouth. The bag had a short, wavy brunette wig in it, too, and a pair of tinted glasses. Sarah pulled the wig over her braids, put on the glasses, and looked at the stranger in the mirror. Somebody new hurried past chairs with lumps in the middle of their backs and lamps that tipped. The woman wearing glasses looked the house over room by room. She looked at Manhasset Bay from a bedroom window. Cold waves pounded and foamed below. There was time to shut the front door softly, though no one was there to hear it. But a car could pull up. Someone might be walking along the road. Sarah ran away from the beach houses, stiff-legged in her low-heeled sandals. Sidewalk and road showed no footprints. Joe Gray, Joe Gray. The full moon slid under clouds. Sarah never looked back.